Hello and welcome to the SQL Challenge. I'm Kendra Little from SQL Workbooks, and this is a dynamic SQL challenge. In this first video, I'm going to be walking you through two of the scripts in this challenge. We'll be walking through the setup script and then the problem script. After this video, you get your chance to take a crack at the solution and then check out the video on the solution script to see 3 different sample solutions. So there is a stretch challenge here. If you want to just write this one way, you totally can write this one way, but there is a stretch solution of if you want to try to write this 3 different ways. I do have 3 different ways that you can do this in the sample solutions. So first up is the setup script. I'm just highlighting over the script name that I'm working on here. This is 00-setup.sql. Now, this whole script can be run at once. And what this script does is it's going to create multiple databases. Note that if you have databases with these names, they are going to be dropped and recreated. So this resets the entire set of 5 databases and creates them. So wherever you run this, which should be a dedicated test instance that isn't going to impact anything else, it's going to create these databases. If you work on the challenge for a while and create stuff in these databases and then rerun this script, though, it's going to reset everything for you. So just know this script is rerunnable, but it resets everything too. Now, it is really fast because we are not putting data into these databases. All we're actually doing is we're creating empty databases. It recreates them if they exist. And then we use each database, and in each database, we are putting in a stored procedure. Each database has a stored procedure that is named callMeMaybe that takes a parameter named p1 of the type integer. And all that procedure does is it returns the name of the database it's running from and the value of that parameter that was passed in. So very, very fast to create these as long as you're able to create databases on the instance. Next up, we're going to move on over and take a look at the problem script. So now I'm in O1 problem, and here is your challenge in this database. So at the top here, there is a little door stop here that says, let's run commands in here one by one. So if you just click Control E on the whole file, it's going to stop you because there's instructions and stuff, and you need to edit the file. So here is the SQL challenge. Of course, if you want to comment that out on your own or delete it in your own copy of the file, it's all you. This is all about you. So the challenge is to edit a procedure that exists. We're going to create it. Doesn't exist yet. We're going to create it in SQLChallenge DB1. So the first step is to use SQLChallenge DB1. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight the whole thing. I've got the little plus sign. It is collapsed right now in Management Studio. I've got a procedure for you to edit. And the procedure is named loop through DBs. It also takes a parameter named P1 that is an integer. So let's expand it and look at what you've got here. What this does is it declares a couple of variables first, and you can declare more variables as needed to complete the challenge. And you can, when you declare variables, you can put them in the location of your choice. This was just a note that I declared all mine here. If you want to declare them there, that of course works nicely for usability to have your variables all declared in one place. So far, we have DB, which is sysname. We're going to use that to store the different database names because we're going to loop through the databases 1 through 5. And then we are creating a table variable to hold our results in. The table variable contains a column named DB. That'll be the database names, and a column named P. That callMeMaybe procedure, it outputs the database name and the value for P, which is an integer. So this is we're gonna loop through each database, and your challenge is to write SQL that just in executing this stored procedure, will run code that will execute callMeMaybe in each database and pass in the value of P that has been chosen on the execution of this procedure. So we're going to take that value that is assigned to P1 and we're going to pass it into the procedure. We're going to put the results in the results table there. Now, I already have a cursor set up to loop through the databases. Cursors in SQL Server have gotten kind of a bad name, but the truth about the matter is that, yes, it is absolutely true that whenever you can replace looping with a set-based query, that is good. So if you don't have to use a cursor or if you don't have to use a while loop, that can often increase your performance quite a bit. However, if you do need to use a loop, while loops have overheads as well. It's not just that, hey, cursors are inherently always way worse than while loops. So I have put this in here in a cursor format. I'm not saying while loops are bad. I'm not saying cursors are bad. Either of them can perform well or can perform terribly. So it's not just like cursors are bad. Yeah, in either case, if we can use a single set-based query in case instead of looping in SQL Server, that can be a positive. But in this case, we are going to do some looping through those databases because we need to execute a procedure in the databases. And imagine that what we're doing this cursor for is we're selecting the set of names from sys.databases where the name is like SQLChallenge DB. So here I've run the query the cursor is based on, and here are the results from that. So we don't want to hard code the database names in the procedure. Imagine that we might have SQLChallenge DB6 or SQLChallenge DB10 show up, and we want this procedure to just automatically handle them. We want to write it to do that. So we want to loop through the databases whose names are like SQLChallenge, they begin with SQLChallenge DB, but then they could have any number afterwards. We want that flexibility in our procedure. So this is not what you need to modify. The place where you do your modifications is down here. Just go ahead and use the existing cursor. That's what the challenge is for. So we open the cursor and we fetch next into the DB variable. So now DB has, if this is our first loop through the cursor, it has the DB1 picked up, the SQLChallenge DB1. And while our fetch status is 0, we are going to do this block. So here is our while for the cursor, and then we've got this begin in. So the challenge you have is to write the logic that is for that database, how do I call the call me maybe proc for the database whose name is in the DB variable? So if we want to say, just add code here that says print DB, right? If you want to do just a debug run ahead of time, you could make that modification, right? So you can take this in stages and try different things in there if you've never worked with this before, or maybe you've worked with this a bunch and you're like, hey, I know how I'm going to attack this. So it'll do our logic for that loop, and then it will fetch next into DB until it gets to the end, and then it will be done. After our cursor's done, we have a part of our procedure. It's already written to say this is what it's going to return. So your challenge is to get it so that the results table variable has the desired results in it, and then we close and deallocate the cursor. So since I made a change to this, I made just a simple change. It doesn't solve the problem. I just said print DB there, right? I'm not putting anything into results. I'm just printing DB. I'm not executing the procedure whose challenge it is, right? So I've created the procedure and just made that one change. What you've got here at the end is 2 sample calls to the procedure with notes on what the output should look like if you complete the challenge successfully. So if I'm running loop through DBs, which is you don't modify the call me maybe, you only modify loop through DBs. So if I'm passing in 128, what I should get back is for each database, I should get a row with the database name and then 128. Because none of them are doing anything to that number. They're just putting it back. Now, I just told it to print stuff. So right now, the procedure is not being executed. Nothing's being put into results, right? So I get an empty result set right back, but it does run. On my messages tab, I did click print, and that just proves to you, hey, I did print database name or the variable. It is looping through those 5 different names if you put that print in there. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this because what you want in there is to call the procedure and put the results into the results table variable. This should say into the results table variable. It is technically just a table variable, not an actual table, and get that out of there. You also, there's another execution that calls it with P1 equals 2. And when you pass in, whatever number you pass in for P1, you should get that value for every single database back. And if you wanted to do additional testing, you could add an additional SQLChallenge database, or you could drop one and take one away, and your result set should change accordingly. So go ahead and grab the setup file and the problem file and get going and write your code. And the stretch challenge is here. I have 3 different ways that you can write this within this stored procedure. So if you're like, oh, I got this, this is easy, your stretch challenge is to write it 2 different ways. And if you want to see if you can do it 3 ways, see if you can come up with all 3 ways, all 3 different techniques that I use to call it in the solution file. Thanks, folks. See you soon in the solution.